Hi all, welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Public Programs and Events Manager at the International Documentary Association. Thank you for joining us for this conversation of Unapologetic, moderated by Variety's artist and editor, Jazz 10K. Really excited for this. Before we get started, I'd like to offer up a land acknowledgement. I come to you today from Chicago, which is on the unceded land of the three fire peoples, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. Before we get started, I'd also like to thank our media sponsor, IndieWire. And we also are able to bring you this screening series with support from KCRW. So thank you very much to all of our supporters. To find out more about upcoming films, we do have films coming up all the way through the end of January. You can go to documentary.org/screening series. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Jazz here, who's going to take it over for me. Hi, Jazz.
Thank you. Hi, Cassidy. Thank you to you. Thank you to the International Documentary Association. I am so excited to be here today for this conversation. So I guess without further ado, let me introduce the panelists today, director and producer Ashley O'Shea and producer Morgan Elise Johnson of Unapologetic. Hi.
Hello. How's it going?
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really, as I said, I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. I think let's just, first of all, we're still in this pandemic, we're still in lockdown. What is it like for you as a filmmaker? It's your first feature documentary too. So what has it been like for you to be showing the film in festivals, having conversations over Zoom and releasing it in this 2020 world? Actually,
dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Yeah,
take it away.
Yeah, it's been a series of high highs and low lows. I think when the pandemic first began, we were in the midst of submitting to film festivals and finishing the film. And, like many other filmmakers right now, we're not estimating that we would be putting this out in this way at this time. But then in June, July, we found out that we got into Black Star. That was not too long before another uprising around the movement for Black Lives kind of started to develop across the US. And so actually at that point, it started to feel like it was really meant to be in this way, and a synergy in a sense, because we feel that the film and what we documented in from like 2015 and on is very much so a blueprint to what we're seeing in the movement for Black Lives that was happening, this summer. And so I think we're just really grateful that we were still able to put out the film, that we feel like it can still really be a resource to people that are looking to get involved in the social movement. And also virtually, although we lost a lot of like the human connection that we so desired, people have been able to watch it like pretty much anywhere since we released it. So we've had like an outdoor event and we've done a few drive-ins. So like we've tried to connect with people where we can. But yeah, it's been we feel like in a lot of ways it's still premiered, and like kind of everything in the process since then has really kind of happened how it was supposed to.
Yeah. Morgan, do you want to add anything to that? Oh,
you're muted.
You're muted.
Yes, I can just say that on a personal note for you, Ashley, I know I was initially I didn't know how you were going to feel with this being your breakout directorial debut. It was like, wow, this really sucked to not be able to to stand on a stage at a festival and like hear the applause and like watch how people react to the film. But what these times have taught us is that, you know, we can adapt to anything, and it gave us the opportunity to connect with people in a different way. For instance, like festivals usually are not that accessible to our community, the community that we were targeting and trying to reach, you know, Black youth. So in a way, we were able to bring the film directly into people's homes, I mean, in a limited way, and share this moment with friends and family at, you know, small community screenings and things like that, when we otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity if we had done the whole traditional festival way. So, you know, we made lemonade. And so far, we're just happy that the film is having an impact, and that we're able to help facilitate this very important dialogue at a crucial like pivot point for our country.
Yeah. Let's go back. For you, Ashley, what spurred your desire to just pick up the camera and get out there and start filming? Like, was there something you were seeing on the news, reading in the papers? Like, what was it? It was like, I've got to tell this story.
Yeah. So the origin is basically, I went to school in the suburbs of Chicago. I was still here shortly after I graduated, and there was just like a lot of buzz on social media about a lot of the young Black organizations and collectives that have been working in the city. And in particular, around the fall of 2015, they were organizing to get the off-duty cop that killed Rekia Boyd to get Dante Servon fired. And so there were these like monthly police board hearings where you know, community gathers with this appointed police board who was led by, at the time was led by our now mayor, Lori Lightfoot. And it was kind of like this direct forum for folks to kind of, you know, share how they've been dealing with like police misconduct and just how they have seen police not serve their communities. And so I attended one of those meetings, and within that space, kind of after the whole like pop and circumstance of everything, the young Black people in the space shut the meeting down, which at the time was just like not, you know, nobody was like hanging out at the police board hearings, shutting them down. But they were very intentional with that, you know, like it was a very strategic move, which is something I really try to push in the film, is like this stuff doesn't just pop out of nowhere. Like they were very intentional about what they were going to do at that meeting. And so I was just really like taken aback that the people that were mostly leading in the space at that time and on the bullhorns were like Black women and femmes and people that I could really closely identify with in a way that I didn't necessarily identify with other, you know, social movements that I had been taught in my formal education. And I just began to research whether or not there were any like comprehensive media pieces about social movement for Black people that was told from this perspective. And I came up short. So, you know, that's when I reached out to Janae, who was a leader in BYP 100 at the time. And, you know, when she said yes, I kind of everything just kind of snowballed one thing into another. But, you know, there was just so many leaders, you know, they don't call it a leaderless movement, they call it a leaderful movement. And so there were just so many leaders in the space that were women or trans folks or non-binary. And I just it was just hard to look away. So, you know, I knew that if it was something that I could connect to, that there had to be an audience for it somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, you just mentioned it. Like, you know, what struck me watching this was how very few docs and films have touched on, you know, the Black women in Chicago, the activists, you know, and what they've been doing, you know, and that's where Unapologetic is one of those few documentaries that actually sheds this light on, you know, the women behind the movement. I mean, can you comment to that? Like you said, you know, there wasn't a great deal out there till now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, we live in a patriarchal society. So I think, history is always like told by the majority. And I had seen Black women in my communities for years and in my family, and at my church and in so many places that were leaders and that influenced me. So, I knew it wasn't because there was a lack of representation or a lack of leadership from that, from Black women. But, I felt like it's just one of those things, like if you get it, you get it. And, I felt like nobody except a Black woman could make a film like this because we get things that other people don't. And I don't know if that's the reason why nothing like this has necessarily existed before. I'm sure there's a lot, like I said, patriarchy and a bunch of other things. But I've felt so much like I've been held down by Black women in so many ways in my life. And maybe it was just because of a lack of understanding that it hasn't existed to this moment. But I definitely felt like it was just something that I needed to reflect the reality that I was experiencing.
Yeah. And something that's really, striking is the imagery that we have at the opening of the documentary, where you've got, the group going through Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
whilst there's a bunch of white diners, and you've got that comment. I mean, talk about landing on that opening and making that your opening to show the contrast of, Black activists versus people just sitting down there having brunch, going about their business, because it's one of the most striking cinematic things I've seen in documentary filmmaker this whole year.
It was definitely a team decision. I'm looking at Morgan.
We're laughing because we were like snickering at each other because that scene was in so many different places before we up top. And I think what it does is kind of like rips off the Band-Aid of like, oh, we're getting into the real. And it poses like that question of like, where are you in this progressive movement? And I think it puts people in that uncomfortable position of like, am I the person at the bar crying? Am I the person that's looking away when things are happening to Black people? Or am I the person that's on the front lines making noise about it? It kind of makes you choose. Mm-hmm. So we ended up, after doing a number of kind of like test screenings coming through the Cartemquin Labs program and things like that, we ended up moving it up top.
Yeah, wow. Exactly what Morgan said. It took us a minute to get there. But it was like when we did it, it just made perfect sense. Yeah.
Because I think it's exactly what you just said, Morgan. Like it just sets you up. First of all, this is what you're going to be seeing. Where do you question it as an audience member? Like, where am I in this? You follow Janae and Bella, your subjects. Like, how did you land on the focus of the documentary? Like, who you were going to focus on, whose story you were going to tell? Like, when did that come into the process?
Yeah, so like I said, Janae was the first person that I reached out to about this idea, because she was the co-chair of the Chicago BYP 100 chapter at the time. And once I talked to her more and learned that she was starting her PhD program, and she was 24 and had just like gone through this really other rigorous program at UChicago, I was just really excited to kind of see what that type of balance looks like, because she was very involved with the grassroots movement as well. She helped with she helped write a lot of the like policy agendas that Black Youth Project 100 put out. So she just like had a lot on her plate. And, I think I saw part of myself in her. And I think a lot of Black women do, just because we're always trying to do everything. And so because I resonated so closely with that, and she really kind of just was an open book from the start. And then shortly after we started filming, Laquan McDonald, the tape of his killing came out, and they fired the police superintendent shortly after. And so I was at a board. I was back at the CPD headquarters, where the organizers were like celebrating, and Bella performed towards the end of that night. And it was just it was just amazing energy. And when I talked to her more, I found out she was from the west side of Chicago. She was really in a space of just trying to figure out, like, she was learning about the movement through her performances. And also had a whole history with her family being incarcerated, and there were just so many layers that I felt complemented Janae really well. And so we did a collection of interviews with other possible characters as well, but they just kind of ended up being the ones I kept gravitating back towards, and that kept saying yes, honestly. So that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I think that one of the most important things that this film does is help to demystify the Black Lives Matter organizer. There's so many narratives out there about who these people are. They're jobless kids with nothing to do, who just like get up and loot and burn things and cause trouble. And, we end up seeing a bunch of very smart and civically engaged young people who are directly affected by this prison industrial complex and want to make a difference. And, I'm also a millennial. I see myself in Janae a lot, just being someone who has come through PWIs, like white institutions, and trying to like work through those institutions to bring about some type of change in Black liberation. So I think that this film, for those who just don't get it, who don't understand what motivates young people, it helps kind of pull back the curtain and lets you into their lives.
Yeah. I love that. And that was one of the things that I loved about watching this, is that the way the way you portray these women is such a well-rounded, portrayal of them. So like, how much time did you spend with them, like following them, interviewing them, to get this, like like Morgan was saying, to basically, tear up this, this portrait, this representation that some of the media is like has been saying? And
well, if you let the film tell it, it was a year, but if we're being real, it was more like a 4.5 year journey with Janae and Bella. In large part because we were taking that time to build trust with the both of them. And really, I knew with Janae, I wanted to capture as much of her PhD journey as possible. I knew that I maybe wouldn't be able to make it all the way to her dissertation, but I learned a lot too, like learning that the proposal and getting approved for that is like a huge step. So I knew that I wanted to follow through with her to that. And then, Bella is like an onion, there's layers. So it really took a while to peel those back, especially with everything that's about her family and incarceration and her brother being in prison. That was just not something that she had ever really, I mean, most people don't, but she hadn't really explored or allowed someone to see visually. So, there were periods of time where we weren't really filming with either of them, but just allowing time to kind of pass, because I knew that as much as this is a story about the movement evolving, it's also about these two 20-somethings going through, really pivotal time in their lives. Because, who in their 20s isn't going through a lot, So I think at probably the 2-year mark is when I finally kind of settled in and was like, it'll probably serve the story better if we keep moving along with them. And then, you know, with Bella, it ended up being perfect because like literally right at the end was kind of when she just like she let it all out and allowed us to really break through some of those more difficult conversations, which I think really ended up benefiting the narrative in the long run.
Yeah. And was, you know, when you're spending that much time with somebody or, you know, with anybody, things change. Did anything happen whilst you were shooting the documentary that changed the course of what you had originally hoped it would be? And then it's like, actually, this has happened. We're going to go this way instead.
Did anything happen? Yes.
I know you're going to have stories.
I'm like, how real are we getting? Yeah, I mean, for one, I definitely felt like originally I was trying to tell a much broader story about the whole movement, because there was just so many layers and so many campaigns, and I was just kind of literally hopping around everywhere, filming everything for like that whole first year, because I kind of thought a broad stroke, you know, approach to it would really benefit us in the long run. But then once we started doing getting feedback from folks and like cutting things into rough scenes and things like that, you know, people were really connecting a lot more to the personal narratives and to the characters. And so that's kind of when we started to lean more into that approach. And I also just think like it was hard to know when to stop filming like kind of like all the bigger political stuff, because if you live in Chicago, you know, there's like always something on fire. Like there's always somebody is corrupt, or, you know, something terrible is happening in the police department. And, you know, you want to try to illuminate as much of it as you can. But, you know, from the beginning, organizers were pretty clear about their intention to get out the mayor, the state's attorney, and the police superintendent. So eventually we made the decision to really frame it around that sort of trajectory. But there was so much more that was happening in Chicago at the same time. So we really had to get to a point of figuring out where the broader political things kind of overlapped with Janae and Bella's story. And that's why it ended up, like, politically it's condensed to a year, because anything more than that would have just been too much to handle in Chicago. So
I love that. How did, you know, you talk about the police, you know, looking at the, you know, the police brutality. What was your stance before you started making the film, and how did that change once you started filming, getting inside it all? Like, how did that move? How did that change? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely an advocate for Black Lives Matter before starting the film. My first like protest I ever attended was after Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012. So I wasn't trying to shy away from my perspective and my opinion on that. At the beginning of filming, I was probably more kind of in the middle of, I guess, my understanding of policing. And I hadn't really experienced Chicago police at that point. I had only really been in Evanston and in my home in Indianapolis. So I was generally just like, we need to get the bad cops out, kind of. But once I started to learn all these things about the Chicago Police Department and how they spend like $40 million a day on the cops here, while we're closing schools and mental health clinics and people are living in food deserts, and how they were continuing, you know, we mentioned, we have Rakia and Laquan in the film, but there's so many other, like, the end card at the end of the film with Rakia's name is all the Black women and femmes that have gotten killed by the police since we started production. So kind of throughout the course, like in being with Janae and Bella and their community, I really learned like what this conversation around defunding the police is, and you know, what people mean when they say, excuse me, what people mean when they say police and prison abolition, you know, isn't necessarily let's just open up the jails and let everybody run free and, you know, the serial killers are everywhere and things like that. It's really about starting to take the money away from these institutions that aren't necessarily rehabbing people like they claim to be, and let's pour it into the community in a way that allows people to have food in their stomachs and mental health services and an education and a job, so that they're not even getting to the point where they feel like they have to hurt somebody or participate in an activity that would land them in prison or jail. So I think it was definitely like being surrounded by Janae and Bella in their community, and Janae in general, like Janae just like, she knows so many things. She's like a walking historian. So I definitely grew and shifted in my stance on that. And I really still kind of take their lead on those type of conversations, because I feel like, organizers are really in a space where they're imagining a new world without police. And so I feel like they always take the time and do their due diligence to really try to explain it in a way that, anyone can understand, because, it's scary for some people to comprehend what it looks like to not have police if they live in a community that is dangerous, or where they feel like, they're not safe. So yeah, that was a lot of words.
No, it's perfect. We like a lot of words. But I think, as you said, when you're living in Chicago, you filmed in Chicago, and then you get into the editing room, and so much is still going on, not just there, but like around the country. So did that influence you in the editing process, not just whilst you're filming, but like later on in post, when you're like, okay, we're putting the story together and this is going on in the news?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much did that impact you?
I think once we made the decision to really kind of hone in on Janae and Bella, that it became a much easier process, and we weren't necessarily following, trying to follow that script as closely. And once we were able to actually sit down full time and just focus on, what we were cutting together, we realized that the power of the story is like how this movement is changing and growing these two women in their respective spaces. And so I think kind of just between being really committed to that mindset, and also, understanding that if we tried to make a film about everything that was happening in Chicago, it was going to feel really watered down and historical and, not as enticing to watch. I think that really helped guide us throughout our edit, for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the thing that impacted editing the most was funding. So thank you to the Ford Foundation for believing in us, because Ashley really put this project on her back and did a lot of it through in-kind.
You always give me so much credit.
I mean, because like people don't know what suffering is, okay? Like this film would not have been made if Ashley hadn't just given up years of her life to do it without funding. And it took for us to get to like a rough cut to be able to like hand it off to a funder before they, people would really give it a chance. And now it's crazy that we're here and like everybody wants to interview us and things like that. But for emerging filmmakers, there's a lot of fellowships and hey, let's like teach you about filmmaking and stuff, and not a lot of money available. So like once we got a chunk of money to really sit in the edit room as a team and workshop every day, the storyline came together within months. And that was the thing that really impacted the film and why it's out now during this moment.
Yeah, I love that. You're also a cinematographer too. So how did that help you frame the story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, my decision to even direct this film was because I was out filming and really connecting with the story with my camera. And I just felt like once the intimacy and the access that I was getting with my footage and with my camera, it just felt like, there was no other way for someone to tell it than if I was, directing the whole piece. So I as much as like it was really difficult in the beginning to kind of, you know, borrow and steal in every which way to try to go out and shoot, because I didn't own a camera at the time. I didn't, you know, I was newly graduated, so I didn't really have money to rent equipment and things like that. So I think in a lot of ways, having to be so nimble in the beginning was how I really was able to connect with the subjects and with the community. And even when we got more funding and we're filming things last year, I still didn't really hire people. Like I hired a sound person like all of like 3 times for this film. It definitely should have been more, but I think in large part because Janae and Bella had just gotten so used to me, just, you know, being there with them and feeling like there's a camera, yes, but like it's not a whole, you know, 5, 6, 7 person crew coming up in my apartment or at my family's barbecue and things like that. And I always go back and forth about it because, you know, I love beautiful images as much as anyone else. But I think I had to kind of really like some of the scenes are hard for me to watch because I just don't like how I filmed them. And I just kind of have to suspend myself above it because I know that the intimacy and the honesty is there. You know, we sourced a lot of footage from the community as well, from other people that go out and film a lot of events. And, you know, like I said, even though it's not perfect cinematography wise to me, I think that you can feel like the connection of the camera with the subjects and with the community, despite, you know, the many different cameras we shot this film on.
I was just gonna say,
I clearly can't stop talking about these cameras.
Who are into like camera work and cinematography, they may notice like, oh, like this may look like different files, whatever. And then all of a sudden, like the third act gets like super, you know,
it does.
smoother, and it's like,
beautiful.
Okay, that's when the money kicked in. So see what happens when you fund Black women. It's just like less stressful. We can rent here.
I also think I learned how to film a like I didn't know how to shoot a documentary when I started the process. So
and it's stressful.
You're literally watching my journey of like learning how to shoot a film at the same time that you're watching it, I think, in a lot of ways.
That is key because like as a documentary director, it is nerve-wracking just inserting yourself in people's lives. And especially with organizers who are skeptical of you when you first introduce yourself because they think that you're the feds or anything else. So there was like a lot of tension. So for you to have to go into that situation and try to like perfectly
make friends with people,
perfectly frame things while you engage in a bunch of just like very tense and emotional conversations around Black liberation, Black death, police murders. You know, it's very difficult to do.
It sounds like you were fearless too, though.
I don't. That's a very kind word to adopt. I mean, I think that a couple things that benefited me was definitely that I was still pretty young at the time and like not knowing kind of everything that should go into a documentary or in the process of production. I think, you know, my ignorance kind of just benefited me a lot in the beginning. But also I had a team, and, you know, Morgan as my producer, I had a Black editor, Ruben Daniels Jr., especially towards the end when things with Bella, where we were really trying to like broach different subjects, like I really depended on them for like that push because I was just very burnt out trying to like maintain a relationship while also still asking people things like after they've already kind of said no or hesitated. And, you know, Morgan and Ruben were really constantly pushing me to just, you know, give it a week or two, then come back and try to just like be really transparent with people about what we're trying to do. I think that's like something in documentary people run away from sometimes. Like they don't want their subjects to know too much, but you know, it's just like at some point you have to be really frank with people because these are their lives that you're talking about, and you don't want to be exploitative. You want to be ethical, And I think, yeah, I just think if I didn't, and even before Morgan and Ruben, like I had my friends and other Black people, like I just had people that were continually reminding me of how important this film is. Like I remember Yvonne Welbin, who some folks may know, like I met with her one time, she was mentoring me and she literally told me I need to film for like another 2 years, and I thought I was gonna cry. Like I wanted to leave that meeting crying. And then I filmed for another 2 years. So like it was definitely like in big ways because of the team and community I had that led to my fearlessness, as you so kindly put it.
And you spent that much time with Janae and Bella, and it's this voice, the power of their voice and the activism. Like, what did you take away? What did you learn from them spending that much time with them, following their story?
I learned that you have to give yourself grace in this work, whether that means you're out in the streets, whether you're writing policy, whether you're trying to figure out who you are as an artist, that things that feel so immediate when you're younger are not necessarily things that have to be solved or figured out right away. And I think that was the larger movement too, was like when we started filming, a lot of the organizations were within their first 5 years of coming about. And they hit a lot of bumps in the road as they kind of hit that 1 year, 2 year mark, because they had never done this before. And, especially with something like, centering around this Black queer feminist lens, that could be a radical idea to try to introduce into a community, a Black community especially. So, it definitely wasn't, there was definitely some, drama and issues along the way. But I think people kind of hit that point where it's like, okay, this is bigger than me. And if I am trying to throw myself headfirst into this and I'm not taking care of myself or taking stock of my people or not treating people how they should be treated, like I need to take a step back and figure out how to better approach this. And, I think that's what you're seeing in the film is like Janae and Bella are hitting those roadblocks, but then they eventually get to a point where they're like, okay, let me just take a step back and, try this from a different angle in a way that will better serve the community in the long run.
Yeah. Morgan, what about for you? Like, watching the film, like for you, what's been your biggest takeaway, and especially seeing Janae, Bella, 2020, we have a new president and a new vice president making history. You've got Stacey Abrams and Georgia, like there's all this stuff coming out. What is it like for you?
Oh man, that's such a loaded question for me because I also like work in media, like traditional journalism. Like I'm a publisher for a news organization called The Tribe here in Chicago. So at the same time that I was making Unapologetic, I was starting this new venture, mostly because Chicago stays in the political landscape, the political narrative, but I didn't feel like Black people had a lot of agency. And working on Unapologetic, it taught me who I should be listening to, which is Black women and queer voices. They're the ones on the front lines. And with the movement for Black Lives, this movement doesn't look like our grandparents' movement. It's not led by a singular Black man. It's not coming out of the Black church. There's something different brewing here. And I think that it's worth studying. And they've taught me so much, and thinking about Bella in particular, because Bella and I have gotten close over this period, and Bella actually had a lot of agency in telling this story. I mean, she would let us know if she was done with us. Like if there was something that she needed some Starbucks in order to do this scene, we were stopping at Starbucks. Like I was like, give her what she wants. But there, when we were filming the scene of her going to visit her brother in prison, we were teeter-tottering on, you know, what do we film? How much space do we give them to just like live in this moment? Because they really hadn't seen him in a while. So I remember her and her mom were crying afterwards, and I went up and spoke to her and said, like, I've never experienced this before. I've never gone through what you're going through. And she just looked at me and said, this has been my entire life. So there are people among us who have such more deeper personal battles that they're fighting. And it just opened up my eyes to my own privilege and made me really interrogate myself on what kind of storyteller that I'm going to be. And I think that's one who is going to give agency to Black women to be a part of their own storytelling.
Beautiful. I love that. Morgan, Ashley, thank you so much for sharing the making of Unapologetic. And thank you to the International Documentary Association for this incredible conversation.
Thank you, Jazz.
Thank you.